Well, as I'm sitting here this morning and listening and appreciate what the others have said, also notice, you notice the background noise of some children, which is a blessing. Because that says as Samson was saying, talking about the importance of family in the future. The children are a great blessing because that is the future. But it's also a reminder that tired parents are coming and bringing their children, and that this is important to families. And as we gather together, we are God's family. We're going to talk a little bit more about that today, but we're moving into another portion of this series. What we're talking about is outreach, which starts, if you're going to change the world, you don't start with the world. It starts with your immediate context, your family. And then it moves to your friends and your neighbors. And then it moves to maybe the city that you live in. And then maybe your province. And then maybe your country. And then it goes out to the world. And that's actually biblical. And that's what we'll be looking at this morning. But before we do, last week I started with a little game. Remember I showed you some questions, get to know you questions. Here's another question. It's not a part of that game. It's just a question I had. If you could picture what you would want your last words on earth to be, what would they be? If you had the chance to say something to the world before you passed on, what would those words be?
Peace.
Okay, so hopefully nothing like it doesn't taste hazardous, or hey, watch this. I've done this 1,000 times and no one's got hurt. Or, hey, bad decisions make good stories. Those are not the things that you want to be known for saying in your final words. Perhaps maybe something like, peace, or some people, make the world better. I'm about to take my last voyage. Love one another. Or, as Leonardo da Vinci said, he said, I've offended God and mankind because my work did not yet reach the quality that I wanted it to have. So maybe you think of something, it'd be great to say something like that. It'd be great to say something memorable, something that revolutionary, right? You'd like to have that as your final words recorded and sent out there. Well, you may not have that opportunity, but the most revolutionary, most important final words that were ever spoken were that of Jesus. And Jesus got to leave his final words, well, really only once, but really twice in one sense, because he's on the cross, and before he died, if you remember what Jesus said as he's on the cross, it is finished. And then he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. What does that mean? It is finished. And then he came back to life. So that was his final words before he died, but then Jesus came back to life. And then as he walked on this earth, he didn't die again, but he had some more final words before he ascended into heaven until his final return. And do you remember what his final words were the second time? Well, according to Luke, there's Jesus and these angels come and they talk to the disciples. Jesus is with his disciples and he says, you'll be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. And after he said this, he was taken up before their very eyes, and a cloud hid him from their sight. So if you take a look at the two last words of Jesus, it is finished, and you will be my witnesses. Matthew records it as go into all the world in a different, in a different context, or the same context in a different place. But Jesus is sending them. So Jesus comes to do something. He came to give his life for us. It is finished. He did that part of the mission. And then he sends us. It is finished. He's done his part. And now he passes the baton. When you're in that race and, it's a team, he passes the baton to us and says, you will be my witnesses. Go and make disciples. Go and share this message. Help people to accept this message. Help people to know it and bring them to me. When we talk about spreading the gospel, how to go, there's so many different questions. How do we do this? I mean, this is something that churches and Christians have wrestled with for centuries. We're trying to figure out what's the best way to go and make disciples. How do you do that, Jesus? And there's no one answer. If there was one answer on how to do it perfectly, this is the formula. You got to say this, and then you got to do this, and do that. We'd all be doing it all the time. We'd have it memorized. But people are different. It's just like what we looked at last week. How do you raise your children to love the Lord? Well, every family's different. Every child's different. Our situations, our experience, what we know, what we've seen, it's different. And that's the same with people. But there are some principles that guide us, that should be our guide. And here's a principle here. You'll be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. So when we look at this, this is how the gospel spread. This is what Jesus said. It's going to start in Jerusalem, and then it's going to grow. And you're going to go into the world, and this message is going to spread. And it starts local. It starts intimate. And then from there, it goes out, and it spreads. And of course, we see that with the gospel. As it begins in Jerusalem, then to Judea, and then in Acts chapter 8, you see it in Samaria, and then past Samaria, you see it going on. And the circle widens through the Gospels. And the last that we read of in Acts, the very last chapter, is it gets up to this part. But guess what? The Acts of the Apostles, those who Jesus sent, even though the book finishes, the work of the apostles, the work of the disciples hasn't finished. And so this circle keeps getting bigger. And here we are as a part of that circle. We are the ones that also have had this message. We have been sent. And if this circle can keep going over time, we see that it's come to Canada. It's come to where we are. And sometimes the circle will start over in Canada and come back because there's all kinds of people being born every day. And so it's our turn to go and tell the story as Jesus sends us. What's a good way to do this? Well, it starts with the familiar family. Jesus, he set the example where he had his own family, and then he had an intimate group of friends that became like his family. Who are my brothers and my mother? And Jesus had this group of disciples who followed him, and he saw them as family. And so Jesus reached out to his own family as well. We know that Jesus, when he started his ministry, he started up in Galilee with what was familiar. And so Jesus reaches out to his hometown at one point. And do you remember what happened in his hometown? They rejected him. In his hometown, and if you think about what that might have looked like when he goes to his synagogue where he grew up, and he knows all these people there, and he's in synagogue just like this. If someone from here left and was, claimed to, be the Messiah and doing all these miracles and came back, you'd be like, come on, why didn't you show us anything over the past 30 years? Now you're doing it, but we've never seen it. We're the closest ones. Surely we would have seen this first. And so they want Jesus, they demand for him to do a miracle. Do for us what you did out there if you really are. And Jesus, his answer is a prophet's not without honor except in his own hometown. And he could not. He was not able to do a miracle there because of their unbelief. They should have seen Jesus' life and seen that he was different and seen that he was special. Even his own brothers did not believe in him. And so sometimes when we reach out to family, it's not that easy. Family members have their own decisions. Kids, they're not going to take our faith and it's going to be the exact same. As parents, we want that, right? We want our kids to be the exact same as we are, have our faith. They have a different experience. They have different knowledge. They're going to have a different journey of faith. Now, it should be the same core teaching. That's great. That's truth. We want that. But how they come to that and how they understand that, that's something that it's their part of their journey. Jesus' brothers didn't believe, but guess what? They were on a journey. Because later on, Jesus' brothers became believers. And we know that because in your Bible, the book of James was the brother of Jesus. And the book of Jude was the brother of Jesus. And so we know that two of his brothers, they wrote about their belief. So it starts with family. This is a chart that was online. I kind of like this. Now, you can, relate it anyway. This person relates Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, ends of the earth, to your hometown, your own culture, nearby culture, and to those that don't know about Jesus. And however you want to do it, what's familiar, maybe, those who are a little more familiar. So you think about the red circle, this is our family. Those who really know us well, and we can have an honest, deep conversation, and they know we love them. And we can have those little disagreements, and we can kind of wrestle with each other in a different way than we might do it in this circle. This circle might be, our neighbors, maybe on our sports team, our friends and our teammates. Maybe it's your coworkers. Maybe it's, people that you consider family outside of your family. And so maybe your neighbors, your neighborhood. And so this is the second circle right now that we're kind of focusing on. And how you relate these things, how you relate these might be a little different, but the point remains the same. The circle starts small, and it gradually grows. Jesus made a new family. He had his close friends. There's John. When his own family rejected him, here is John, and Jesus is on the cross. And he says to his mother, "Here is your son." And then he said to the disciple who Jesus loved, John, "Here's your mother." And from that hour, the disciple took her into his home and took care of her. And so we think of immediate family. Yes, that's family. But we also have, just outside of family, very close friends and relationships that we have that trusting bond. And Jesus had that trusting bond with a number of individuals. And those are the ones that he tried to work with and teach. And some believed and some rejected him from that circle. And Jesus tells us to go and make disciples. And so we are following the pattern of the circles. The circle approach, again, there's no easy way. But we do want to look at how God did it in Scriptures. Jesus was able to teach and to spread the message in Judea, in Galilee, in Jerusalem. But Jesus did not go beyond that physically. Jesus sent others. So when Jesus says it's finished, he does his part. And then those who he trained, those who he trusted, those who he equipped, he sends them into the world. And they seem to have followed a similar pattern. And so you see that in Jerusalem, the gospel message spreads, the church begins. It grows to Samaria, and then we see it growing beyond Samaria. So open your Bibles to Acts chapter 13. Acts chapter 13. Now, if you're following along, we're going to be looking at the circle as it grows kind of about this size right now. And so I brought a map up here of Paul's missionary journeys, because this is how the church grew. In Acts chapter 11, we see that there was a persecution that started, and some Christians went from Jerusalem and they went up to Antioch up here. And this is found in Acts chapter 11. Let's see, I'll give you the exact verse 19 and following. Some believers went from Jerusalem and they went up to Antioch up here. And then they were from Cyprus and Cyrene that went up there. The church was growing. And so when Jerusalem heard about it, they're kind of like, wow, this is great. So who do they send up here to work with the church? They send another person who was from Cyprus. And his name was Joseph. The disciples had a nickname for him. They called him Barnabas. Barnabas means son of encouragement, because he was such an encouragement. This is the guy that, he gave one of his fields, and Ananias and Sapphira tried to copy him. He was all in. And so they're like, would you go up there? And yeah, Barnabas traveled up, and it was familiar, because Barnabas would have known those individuals who went up and planted the church up here, because Barnabas was also from Cyprus. And so there's something familiar there. And then what does Barnabas do? Barnabas, when he's here, he goes over here to Tarsus, and he has to go and find Paul. So he finds Paul, and he brings Paul here, and they're teaching there for a year. And the church here decides to send them on a missionary journey. So here we see the circle starts to grow. And now, so the first stage is here, and then here, and then here, and now it's growing a little bit bigger. So they send Paul and Barnabas, and they don't go very far. Notice, the first missionary journey is this blue line. Their first missionary journey, they just come here and come back. Now, Tarsus isn't very far from Antioch, nor is it far from Iconium, Derbe, Lystra, and this Antioch up here, Antioch in Syria. So that's Acts 13. They're going to Antioch. They come up here, and they're in Antioch in Syria. And open your Bibles to Acts 13. And listen to what happened. They go and they preach this message in the synagogue, what was familiar to them. But there were also Gentiles who were converts to Judaism. And they were in that synagogue. And as they had been dismissed, many of the Jews and devout converts to Judaism followed Paul and Barnabas, who were speaking with them and urging them to continue in the grace of God. The following Sabbath, almost the whole town assembled to hear the word of the Lord. How did that happen? The following Sabbath, almost the whole town assembled. See, those people, after Sabbath, after synagogue was out, they followed them. They had questions. They were excited. What a great message. And they were talking with Paul and Barnabas. They wanted to know more. They probably went home and shared with their neighbors and friends. They probably went home and invited their neighbors and friends to come out and listen to this guy. And the whole town assembled, almost the whole town, to hear the word of the Lord. So many people that these Jews who didn't agree with Paul and Barnabas were jealous. And they tried to stir up some dissension and some fights. And so they opposed them. And then Paul makes this great claim. Paul says, "For this is what the Lord has commanded us." What did the Lord command? "First it is finished, and then I will send you. Go." This is what the Lord has commanded us. "I have made you a light for the Gentiles to bring salvation to the ends of the earth." They understood their mission. They understood this is what their life was about. And so this is what they were doing. They were living it. They were fully committed to it. They were devoted. They prayed for God's help. And then they gave great effort. They were willing to walk away. Barnabas walked away from everything he knew, everything he was comfortable with. As a matter of fact, the first trip Barnabas took with Paul, in the beginning of that journey, let me just back up here. All right? You know when they got down here, this is when they met that slave girl, and this was such a fearful event. They had Barnabas' nephew with them, and he hightailed it out of there. He's like, "I'm gone." And he went home. And so Barnabas and Paul continue on, and they end up coming in this region where Paul is stoned to death. Barnabas didn't say, "Oh man, I could get killed. I didn't sign up for death. I mean, I got lots to lose in life. I'm out of here." Barnabas was fully committed. Paul was fully committed. They were devoted. And they understood, just as Jesus was fully committed, to die on that cross, Jesus came and he said, "It is finished," because he knew that was his mission. And then he sends us. He makes us his light. And he says, "Go into the world." This is part 2 of his mission, passing on the baton. Are we good lights? Are we fully committed? We had on our Wednesday night Bible study the cursing of the fig tree. And you know, when Jesus sees his fig tree, there's no fruit, and he curses it, and they go into the city. He turns over the tables of the money changers, and because here's this Jewish people who should have been producing fruit. They should have been lights to the world. They should have been different. But instead, they're robbing and cheating. They're charging high prices for the sacrifices. And Jesus comes back and the trees wither. And the point is that, if you don't produce fruit, what good are you for the Lord being used? The Jewish nation was to be producing fruit. They were to be lights. Deuteronomy chapter 4, starting in verse 5. Moses says, look, I taught you the statutes and ordinances of the Lord, so that you may follow them in the land that you're entering to possess. Carefully follow them, for this will show your wisdom and understanding in the eyes of the people. When they hear about all the statutes, they will say, this great nation is indeed wise and understanding people. For what great nation is there that has a God near to it, as the Lord our God is whenever we call him? Moses is trying to get them to see, you are supposed to be a light. You're supposed to be different, so that the world will look at you and say, what wisdom. Wow, that's a good way to live. That's the way that life should be. And then Jesus walks into their temple grounds, and they're ripping off, and they're cheating, and they were not producing fruit. They were not being the light to the world. And so Jesus sends his people now to be a light. For I have made you a light to the Gentiles. You know, Jesus was the light in the world. Simeon, when Jesus was born, Simeon took Jesus in his hands because God said, you won't die till you see the Messiah. And Simeon holds up this child and he says, now, Master, you can dismiss your servant in peace as you've promised. He's ready. I can die now. For my eyes have seen your salvation. You have prepared it in the presence of all peoples, a light for revelation to the Gentiles and a glory to the people of Israel. Jesus was that light. Jesus came to do that, and as the people of God, we are now the light of Jesus. He is the head of the body, his church, and he sends us out into the world to be a light. And so, how do we teach our family? How do we teach our neighbors? Every situation is different, but the main thing we need to be doing is trying our best to put into practice the things and follow in Jesus' footstep that we have learned. Conduct yourselves. We'll come back. Conduct yourselves honorably among the Gentiles, so that when they slander you as evildoers, they will observe your good works and glorify God. Peter says that. Paul says to Titus, make yourself an example of good works with integrity and dignity in your teaching. Your message is to be sound, so that any opponent will be ashamed. People will see in you, and they will see in you a light that is not seen before. And of course, Jesus says in Matthew 5, in the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give God glory. So the one thing we know is we are to be a light. To produce fruit, we need to be the light that God has called us to be. To be a light that is dependable. That's the word I was looking for. So we're a light to our families. We're a light to our neighbors and friends. We're a light to everyone who sees us. We act differently, but our light points back to God. We reflect his glory. I brought with me a dependable light. All right. I couldn't fit it under here, so I had to hide it behind. I like this light. I did some research. This is an old light. It's all beat up now. But you know what? This is my favorite part. Quick exchange battery. So when the light runs out, by the way, it's like super bright. It can go like really bright. It doesn't look bright with all these lights. But then when it runs out, if you have a spare battery pack, which I did, grab it, put it in, and it's back on. Well, I remember going camping with this light. But unfortunately, the night I needed it, we were using Nathan's light. Sorry, Nathan. Now, Nathan's light was much brighter than my light. And some of you have heard this, and that's good. But Nathan's light was much brighter. And we were playing some cards late at night with a group from the church here. Many of you were there that night. And Nathan and I heard a bear. And we were playing cards, and he stopped. I said, did you hear that? Yeah, I did. Well, we held the light up, and you can't see outside. I get my flashlight because the screen reflects. So let's go out of the tent. But at that moment, Nathan's light sizzled out because he had one of these, you got a filament in it, and the filament burned out. You remember this? And yeah, and so, well, what's going on? Get it going. You're trying to put the filament in properly and do it all up, and that light, when we needed it most, took a long time to work. And so I wish I had this one. I just click, go there, let's go out. Now, I just say all that to say, no, it was definitely brighter. It was a better light. Nathan did his research. But my point is this. We need to try our best to be a dependable, bright light for Jesus. You don't know if you're going to have an opportunity to be a light tomorrow. But you know that Jesus is using you as a light right now. Every minute of the day, every day of your lives, people are watching you, and Jesus is using you. So what can we do to prepare ourselves, to help ourselves to be the brightest and most dependable light, so that Jesus can count on us when it's truly needed to go into the world, teach our family and friends, and to bring all that glory back to God?